One day, life suddenly took everything from me: my home, my job, and even my hope. What the world threw away as useless waste, I saw as a new beginning. I had no money, no support, only courage and the will to survive. Every piece of waste became a part of my survival journey, and what I built in the end was beyond anything I ever imagined. Hello everyone. Before we start the story, join our YouTube family by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's get into today's story. I became homeless on an ordinary afternoon that did not look important at all. The sky was clear, the streets were busy, and people were moving through their lives without noticing that mine was about to collapse. I had worked for years at a small recycling factory on the edge of the city. The pay was low, but it was enough to survive. I had a tiny rented room, a mattress on the floor, a kettle for tea, and dreams that felt simple but safe. Stability, I believed, was permanent. That illusion ended when the factory owner called everyone together. His voice sounded tired as he explained that the business had failed. Machines would shut down immediately. Salaries would stop. There would be no compensation. Just like that, years of effort turned into silence. I remember standing there holding my work gloves, unable to understand how life could change so quickly. At first, I wasn't afraid. I told myself I would find another job within days. I walked across the city searching for work, knocking on doors, filling forms, and waiting outside offices. Each rejection felt small at the beginning, but after dozens of them, hope slowly weakened. My savings disappeared faster than expected. Rent approached like an unavoidable storm. One evening, my landlord knocked. He wasn't angry, just firm. If I couldn't pay by the end of the week, I had to leave. I promised him I would manage somehow, but deep inside, I knew I was losing the fight. When the final day arrived, I had nothing left to offer except apologies. My belongings were placed outside the room: a backpack, a blanket, a few clothes, and memories that no longer had a place to stay. Watching the door close behind me felt heavier than carrying all my possessions combined. I walked without direction until night arrived. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to sit behind an abandoned bus stop. That became my first shelter. The ground was cold and uneven. Cars passed endlessly, their lights flashing across my face before disappearing again. I tried to sleep, but fear stayed awake. Every sound felt threatening. I realized how vulnerable a person becomes without walls or a lock. Hours passed slowly until morning finally arrived. The next days blurred together. Hunger replaced routine. Pride slowly faded as survival became the only priority. I searched trash bins for food, collected bottles to exchange for coins, and avoided crowded places where people stared with discomfort. Some looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, but most people simply ignored me. Becoming invisible was the hardest part. One evening, dark clouds gathered suddenly, and heavy rain began falling. Within minutes, I was soaked completely. I ran toward the outskirts of the city, searching for cover, and eventually reached a large dumping ground. The smell was strong, and piles of discarded items stretched in every direction: broken furniture, torn mattresses, metal scraps, shattered glass. Everything people once used and then abandoned. I found shelter under a bent metal sheet barely standing upright. Rain hit the surface loudly, creating a rhythm that echoed through the empty space. While sitting there shivering, I began observing the objects around me more carefully. Something strange happened in that moment. Instead of seeing useless trash, I started noticing possibilities. A wooden door lay nearby, scratched but solid. Several plastic containers were still intact. Pieces of metal framing looked strong enough to support weight. Old tires were stacked together, heavy and durable. Someone had thrown away materials that still had life left in them. For the first time since losing my home, my thoughts shifted from survival to creation. A question formed quietly in my mind. What if I built my own shelter using what others had discarded? The idea sounded ridiculous. I had no construction skills, no money, and no tools. Yet the more I looked around, the more possible it seemed. The dumping ground suddenly felt less like a symbol of failure and more like a warehouse of second chances. That night, I barely slept. My imagination kept working, designing walls, a roof, in a small space where rain could not reach me. By morning, the idea had turned into determination. I began collecting materials slowly. First came wooden planks, dragged one by one across the ground. Then pieces of rope, metal strips, and plastic sheets. People passing by stared at me curiously. Some laughed openly, assuming I was wasting time. Their reactions hurt, but they also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't building for their approval. I was building because I needed hope. I found an empty patch of land near the dumping area, dry, unused, and forgotten. It felt appropriate. I placed the wooden boards on the ground, unsure where to begin. My first attempt collapsed within minutes. The boards slipped, and the structure fell apart. Frustration burned inside me, but quitting would mean returning to cold nights and endless uncertainty. So I tried again. Each failure became a lesson. I learned how to balance materials, how to anchor wood using stones, how to create stability with weight instead of nails. My hands developed cuts and bruises, but pain felt meaningful now. Every small improvement proved that progress was possible. Days turned into a routine. Morning meant searching for materials. Afternoon meant building. Night meant resting beside the unfinished structure, protecting it as if it already belonged to me. Slowly, a frame began to appear uneven, but standing. One afternoon, while adjusting a wooden beam, sunlight passed through the gaps and fell directly onto the ground. Inside the structure, I paused, realizing I was standing inside something I had created. It wasn't a house yet, but it was the beginning of one. For the first time since becoming homeless, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt purpose, and without realizing it, the place built from waste had already started. Rebuilding me. The second phase of building began when survival turned into commitment. During the first days, I was only trying to protect myself from rain and cold. But now the unfinished structure, standing on the empty land, felt like a promise I could not abandon. Every morning, I woke up beside it before sunrise. Brushing dust from my clothes and stretching muscles that ached from constant labor, my body was tired, but my mind felt sharper than it had in months. The biggest challenge quickly became stability. The wooden frame I had built looked strong from a distance, yet every strong gust of wind reminded me how fragile it actually was. One afternoon, a sudden storm arrived without warning. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and powerful wind slammed into the structure. I held the frame with both hands as if my strength alone could protect it. Within minutes, one side collapsed, pulling several boards down with it. I stood frozen, staring at the damage. 3 days of work had disappeared in seconds. For a long moment, hopelessness returned. I questioned everything, whether I was wasting energy, whether people laughing at me were right, whether this dream was simply too big for someone with nothing. I sat on the ground surrounded by broken pieces, feeling the same emptiness I had felt the night I lost my room. But then I noticed something important. The foundation made from tires had not moved at all. The strongest part survived because I had built it carefully. That realization changed my thinking. Failure was not proof that I should stop. It was proof that I needed to build smarter. I rebuilt the wall stronger than before. Instead of relying only on wood, I combined materials. Metal strips reinforced the corners. Tires filled with soil acted as anchors. Plastic ropes tied joints together tightly. Progress became slower, but far more reliable. I learned through observation, experimentation, and patience. Every mistake improved the next attempt. People continued to pass by daily. Some still laughed, but others began showing curiosity. A young boy once stopped and asked what I was building. When I said my home, his eyes widened with disbelief and admiration. That reaction stayed with me all day. For the first time, someone saw possibility instead of failure. Food remained uncertain. Some days, I worked with an empty stomach, focusing on movement to ignore hunger. Water became my constant companion. Surprisingly, building itself gave me energy. Each completed section created motivation stronger than exhaustion. As walls slowly rose higher, I started thinking about insulation. Nights were still cold, and I needed protection from temperature changes. While searching through the dumping ground, I discovered hundreds of empty plastic bottles. At first, they looked useless, but after observing how air stayed trapped inside them, I realized they could help maintain warmth. I cleaned the bottles and tied them together in rows, placing them between wooden layers. The result surprised me. The walls became thicker and sturdier. What others considered trash became a solution no one expected. One afternoon, an elderly man approached quietly. He watched me work for several minutes before speaking. Without asking questions, he handed me a small toolbox containing a hammer, screws, and measuring tape. "You're serious about this?" he said simply before walking away. That moment nearly brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just about tools, it was proof that someone believed in my effort. With proper tools, progress accelerated. Measurements became accurate. Walls aligned better. The structure began to resemble an actual house rather than a random shelter. I added a doorway using an old wooden door I had found weeks earlier. When it finally stood upright on its hinges, I opened and closed it repeatedly, amazed by such a simple luxury privacy. The next major challenge was roofing. Rain had taught me harsh lessons, so I layered metal sheets carefully, overlapping each one to prevent leaks. Underneath, I placed plastic banners, collected from advertisements to create waterproof protection. Climbing onto the roof was dangerous, but finishing it felt like victory. For the first time, I could sit inside while rain fell outside without getting wet. That night, heavy rain arrived again. I sat quietly inside, listening to droplets hitting the roof. None entered. I laughed aloud, overwhelmed with relief. It was the first peaceful rain I had experienced since becoming homeless. Light became my next goal. Darkness still filled evenings with uncertainty, and candles were unsafe. While searching for materials near an abandoned warehouse, I discovered broken solar panels stacked carelessly. Most people ignored them, assuming they were useless. I carried the lighter ones back slowly, unsure if they would work. For days I experimented with wires, batteries, and connections. I observed mechanics repairing electronics nearby and copied what I could understand. After many failed attempts, one evening a small bulb flickered faintly, then stayed on. The glow felt magical. A warm light filled the room, pushing shadows into corners. I sat there silently, staring at the bulb as if it were a miracle. Weeks earlier, I had slept in darkness, fearing every sound. Now I controlled my own light. That single moment changed how I saw myself. I was no longer just surviving circumstances. I was shaping them. As the house improved, people's attitudes changed. A woman from a nearby street began bringing leftover food occasionally. A man offered unused paint cans. Children waved when passing by. The place slowly transformed from a symbol of struggle into a sign of creativity. Inside, I built a small cooking corner using stacked bricks and a metal tray. Wooden pallets became a raised bed, lifting me away from cold ground. Fabric scraps turned into curtains that moved gently with the wind. Each addition made the space feel more human, more alive. Yet challenges continued. Some nights doubt returned quietly. I wondered if this home would last, if authorities might remove it, or if life could collapse again unexpectedly. But every morning the structure still stood, answering my fears without words. One evening, after finishing another wall layer, I stepped outside and looked back at the house during sunset. The frame, roof, and window reflected warm light, and for a moment I struggled to believe that my own hands had built it. The dumping ground that once symbolized loss had become the foundation of hope. And as I lay down to sleep that night under my own roof, I realized something powerful. The house was not finished yet, but neither was I. Both of us were still growing, stronger with every passing day. By the time the house began to look complete, I no longer counted days the way I used to. Time was measured in progress. One wall strengthened, one leak repaired, one improvement added after another. What started as desperation had slowly transformed into dedication. Every morning I woke up inside the structure and needed a few seconds to remember that this place was real, that I had actually built it with my own hands from things the world had thrown away. The final stage was not about survival anymore. It was about turning shelter into a home. I began with small details. Until then, the house was functional but rough. The walls were strong yet colorless. The floor was dry but uneven. I wanted this space to feel warm, not just protective. While searching through the dumping ground, I found several half-used paint cans discarded after construction projects. None contained enough paint individually, but together they offered something unexpected. I mixed the remaining colors carefully in a large container. The result was a unique shade, somewhere between earthy brown and soft orange. Using a worn brush, I painted the exterior slowly. Each stroke covered scratches and marks left by different materials, uniting everything into one identity. As the walls changed color, the house stopped looking like waste and started looking intentional. People passing by began slowing down to watch. Some asked questions. Others simply stood quietly, observing the transformation. I noticed curiosity replacing doubt in their expressions. The same place once ignored had become something worth noticing. Inside, I worked on comfort. I collected flat wooden boards to level the floor and covered gaps with fabric layers. Old foam pieces from discarded furniture became cushions. I built shelves from broken cabinets, organizing my few belongings neatly. For the first time in months, I knew exactly where everything was. Order returned to my life along with stability. The solar light system also improved. After experimenting further, I added a second panel and stored more energy during the day. Nights became peaceful instead of fearful. I could read old newspapers, cook simple meals, and sit quietly without worrying about darkness. Light changed more than visibility. It changed my mindset. One evening, while cooking rice on the small stove I had built, I realized something surprising. I felt proud, not the loud pride that demands attention, but a quiet satisfaction growing inside my chest. I had created safety where none existed. I had transformed rejection into opportunity. Word about the house began spreading beyond the nearby streets. One afternoon, a young man arrived carrying a camera. He introduced himself as someone who shared local stories online. He asked if he could record my journey. At first, I hesitated. I had spent weeks invisible. Suddenly, being seen felt strange. But I agreed, hoping that maybe my story could help someone else who felt hopeless. As he filmed, I explained how each part of the house came from discarded materials: tires for foundation, bottles for insulation, metal sheets for roofing, and solar panels for electricity. Speaking about the process made me realize how much I had learned without formal training. Necessity had become my teacher. After the video spread online, more visitors arrived. Some brought tools, others donated materials. A few people simply came to talk. They shared their own struggles, lost jobs, broken plans, moments when life felt impossible. Listening to them, I understood that homelessness was not only about lacking a house, it was about losing direction. And sometimes, rebuilding direction begins with building something tangible. Together with volunteers, we improved we cleared trash from nearby land and planted small plants along the pathway. Someone donated seeds, and soon green leaves appeared around the house. The area that once looked abandoned slowly became welcoming. Children began playing nearby, laughing freely. Despite attention and praise, I never forgot the nights of cold fear that started this journey. Those memories kept me grounded. Every improvement reminded me how fragile stability can be and how powerful determination must become to protect it. One quiet night, after everyone had left, I sat outside watching the house glow softly under solar light. The air was calm. For the first time since losing my job, I felt complete stillness inside my mind. No panic about tomorrow, no shame about yesterday. Just presence. I thought about the moment rain had driven me into the dumping ground weeks earlier. Back then, I believed my life had ended. Now I understood it had simply changed direction. Losing everything forced me to discover strength I never knew existed. The house stood as proof that value is not defined by origin. Materials thrown away still held purpose. A person rejected by circumstances still held potential. Transformation required effort, patience, and belief, nothing more. Soon, I began helping others replicate small shelters using recycled materials. Teaching them felt natural. Watching someone else build their first wall reminded me of my own beginning, uncertain but hopeful. The project that started as personal survival quietly became a shared movement. One afternoon, a man who had once laughed at my work approached me. He apologized, admitting he never believed the house would succeed. I smiled and told him I didn't blame him. At the beginning, even I had doubts. Sometimes people need to see change before they believe it is possible. As months passed, the house remained strong through storms and heat. Each challenge it survived strengthened my confidence. It was no longer an experiment. It was home. The final touch came when I placed a small, handmade sign beside the door. It simply read, "Built from waste, built with hope." Those words summarized everything the journey meant to me. That night, I closed the door, lay down on my bed, and listened to silence, peaceful, protective silence. I realized that home is not defined by expensive materials or perfect design. Home is the place where effort meets meaning, where struggle turns into growth. I had started this journey homeless, carrying nothing but fear and uncertainty. Now I own something far more valuable than property. I own proof that rebuilding life is always possible. And as sleep finally came, I understood the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the strongest foundations are created not from what we are given, but from what we refuse to give up on. Even when the world leaves us with nothing at all,